The oxygen monitor's alarm split the silence like a scream. Park Dae-Hyun's chest rose and fell in shallow, desperate gasps. His lips tinged blue in the dim light of the Virginia estate bedroom. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, each drop a metronome counting down precious seconds. The night staff stood frozen in the doorway, their eyes wide with panic, hands trembling as they watched one of South Korea's most powerful patriarchs struggle for breath. But Amara James didn't freeze. She moved through the chaos like water finding its path, her movements precise and unhurried. No screaming, no dramatic gestures, just competence carved from years of ICU shifts where hesitation meant death. She adjusted his positioning with practiced hands, tilted his head to clear the airway, her fingers finding his pulse point while her eyes tracked the monitor's erratic numbers. The other staff members whispered frantically in Korean, their voices rising in pitch, but Amara tuned them out. There was only the patient, only the breath, only the moment between life and something else. She leaned close, monitoring his oxygen saturation as it climbed slowly back toward safety. His eyes flickered open, clouded with pain and medication but present, aware. His weathered hand lifted slightly and found her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for a man balanced on the edge of consciousness. His lips moved, forming words in Korean that she couldn't understand, but his tone carried weight that transcended language. He was trying to tell her something important, something that couldn't wait. Then he whispered in accented English, each word dragged up from somewhere deep and hidden. "You have her eyes." Amara's breath caught. Her eyes? Whose eyes? But before she could ask, before she could process what he meant, his grip loosened and his eyes drifted shut again. The monitors stabilized. The crisis passed. The staff members exhaled collectively, relief washing over their faces as they retreated to their positions. But Amara remained still, her wrist still tingling where he'd held it, those 4 words echoing in her mind like stones dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward into questions she didn't know how to ask. Morning arrived with cold sunlight that did nothing to warm the mansion's marble corridors. Amara moved through her duties with the same quiet efficiency that had carried her through the night, but everything felt different now. The estate operated according to invisible hierarchies she was only beginning to understand. The household staff deferred instantly to Han Seon-hee, Park Dae-Hyun's daughter-in-law, a woman whose elegant composure never cracked but whose eyes missed nothing. Security personnel answered only to Kang Jun, the head of the family's protection detail, a man whose stillness suggested violence held in careful check. And then there was Park Ji-hoon, who arrived from New York that morning in a black town car, his tailored suit and expressionless face marking him as someone accustomed to command. Amara existed somewhere in the spaces between these power structures. She wasn't a servant in the traditional sense. The family clearly didn't regard her as one of them. But she also wasn't invisible. People watched her, noticed her, especially Han Seon-hee, whose gaze followed Amara through rooms with an intensity that felt like assessment, like measurement. That afternoon, as Amara prepared medication in the kitchen, Han Seon-hee appeared beside her with the silent grace of someone used to surprising people. Her voice was soft but precisely articulated. "Meridian staffing is thorough. They choose carefully." Amara nodded, appreciating the compliment even as she focused on counting pills. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." Han Seon-hee's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "My father-in-law personally reviewed every candidate. He's very particular about who enters his home." Something in her tone suggested layers Amara couldn't quite parse. She simply nodded again and returned to her work, unaware that Meridian staffing had been created 8 months ago for the sole purpose of hearing her. That the entire company existed as an elaborate mechanism to bring Amara James into this house without raising questions. The seed was planted, but the truth remained buried. 3 days later, Han Seon-hee hosted a private dinner in the estate's smaller dining room, the one with hand-painted silk wallpaper, and a table that seated 12. 10 women arrived throughout the evening, each one more polished than the last. Daughters of diplomats, heirs to corporate empires. Women who spoke 4 languages and wore jewelry that cost more than Amara's annual salary. They were introduced to Park Dae-Hyun with careful ceremony, each presentation choreographed to highlight lineage, education, accomplishments. Amara served tea silently, moving along the edges of the room like a shadow, pouring and retreating without drawing attention. She watched Ji-hoon reject each woman with impeccable politeness. His refusals were so courteous they almost didn't register as refusals. Too polished, perhaps. Too rehearsed. These women had been groomed their entire lives for moments like this, and it showed in every calculated smile and practiced gesture. Then his eyes found Amara across the room, not with the heat of attraction, not initially, with something stranger, recognition, as if he'd been searching for something specific and had just found it in the least expected place. He interrupted his grandmother mid-introduction. "Excuse me." He addressed Amara directly, his English flawless and American inflected. "How long have you worked in cardiopulmonary care?" The room went silent. 10 pairs of eyes swiveled toward the help. Amara met his gaze steadily, setting down the teapot with care before answering. 6 years in ICU, 2 years in private care before this placement. She didn't embellish, didn't add unnecessary details or try to make herself sound more impressive. Just stated facts in her calm, professional voice. Ji-hoon's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Interest, not romantic, intellectual. He noticed what she wasn't doing. She wasn't trying to impress him, wasn't angling for his attention, wasn't performing. In a room full of women who'd spent their entire lives learning how to be noticed by men like him, Amara's complete lack of performance was the most striking thing about her. Later that night, in a private office that smelled of leather and expensive whiskey, Kang Jun handed Ji-hoon a manila folder. His expression was carefully neutral. "You asked me to investigate the staffing situation." Ji-hoon opened the folder. Inside were corporate documents, registration papers, tax filings. Meridian Staffing Agency, registered 8 months ago in Delaware. Sole owner and operator listed as Park Dae-Hyun. Total number of employees hired through the agency, 1. Amara James. Ji-hoon read the documents twice, his frown deepening. Why would his grandfather create an entire staffing company to hire a single caretaker? The operational costs alone would be absurd. There were 1,000 simpler ways to bring someone into the household. This wasn't romance. This wasn't even preference. This was orchestration on a scale that suggested something far more significant than hearing help. The night shift was Amara's favorite time. The estate grew quiet after midnight, the constant hum of staff activity fading into stillness. She sat in the chair beside Park Dae-Hyun's bed, reading his medical chart by lamplight when Ji-hoon entered without knocking. He moved quietly for someone his size, settling into the chair across from her without preamble. No flirtation, no small talk, just a direct question delivered in a tone that expected an honest answer. "Did you know my grandfather selected you personally?" Amara looked up from the chart. "No. The agency said I was the best match for his medical needs." Ji-hoon studied her face with the same intensity his grandmother used, but his felt different, less suspicious, more curious. "You don't act like someone trying to secure a position." She considered this, then responded with characteristic honesty. "I've never been in a position worth securing." The words landed between them like something solid. Ji-hoon leaned back in his chair, and for a long moment neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that happens when two people recognize something in each other they haven't quite named yet. Something shifted in that room. Neither of them acknowledged it, but both felt it. 2 nights later, Amara was adjusting Park Dae-Hyun's blanket when his eyes opened suddenly, clear in a way they hadn't been since she'd arrived. The medications usually kept him sedated or confused, but in this moment he was completely present, completely lucid. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. When he spoke, each word was deliberate and weighted with meaning. "Lorraine James saved my life." Amara's hand stilled on the blanket. Lorraine James, her mother. Her mother, who died when Amara was 19. Her mother, who'd worked as a nurse but had never mentioned knowing anyone like Park Dae-Hyun. Her mother, whose past had always contained strange gaps and unexplained silences. Park Dae-Hyun continued, his voice growing stronger. I owe a debt that can never be repaid. Amara opened her mouth to respond, to ask the 1,000 questions suddenly flooding her mind. But before she could form words, the monitors began beeping irregularly. Eyes lost focus. The lucidity drained away as quickly as it had appeared, and he drifted back into sedation. She stood there beside his bed, her hands trembling slightly, her mind racing. Everything she'd assumed about this job, about why she was here, about what this meant, had just shattered and reformed into a pattern she couldn't yet see. Her mother had saved this man's life. This man had created an entire company to bring her here. This wasn't about medical care. This was about something deeper. Something hidden. Something that connected her mother's past to her present in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. She left the room on unsteady legs, walking down the hallway with her mind churning. At the far end of the corridor, Ji-hoon stood in shadow, watching her. He'd heard something, seen something change in her expression. He didn't know what had happened in that room, but he knew the landscape had shifted. Upstairs, unseen by either of them, Han Seon-hee observed from the balcony overlooking the main hall. Her elegant face, usually so carefully composed, showed worry. Real worry. The kind that comes when carefully constructed plans begin to unravel. She'd known this moment would come eventually. She just hoped it would come later, after more preparation, after more time. But Park Dae-Hyun had never been patient, even on his deathbed, especially on his deathbed. The truth was emerging whether they were ready or not. If this story left you wanting answers, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a comment telling us what you think Lorraine James did to save Park Dae-Hyun's life. And smash that like button if you're ready to uncover the secrets this family has been hiding. The truth is just beginning to surface, and you won't want to miss a single revelation.